So my journey began, over 40 years ago. I was in college. I was studying to be an archaeologist. That was my goal. As I was focusing on this career in archaeology, I stumbled upon learning about the field of conservation and by a visit to a museum. To become a conservator, you need to have a degree in what's called a related area of specialty, which is studio art, art history, and science. So I was able to finish my degree in archaeology because it was a related field, but then I had to...
Neon lights, I'm baffled. Pick it apart like samples. Give me all I can handle. Light me up like a candle. I'm taming lightning. Curse it, got that lightning. Plasma in my veins.
Today's podcast is sponsored by FMS Sign Products. FMS has been providing quality products for the neon sign industry since 1946 and strives to support tube benders by making it quick and easy to purchase the materials they need. FMS offers a wide variety of readily available and competitively priced products, which can be purchased directly from their easy-to-use website. Don't need a whole box of tubing for your project? No problem. FMS can ship partial boxes and mix and match colors and sizes as needed. Shipping is secure and easy anywhere in the nation. Check out their website at fmsneon.com to see the full line of products and see how easy it is to have all your neon supplies shipped directly to your door. Again, visit fmsneon.com. That's fmsneon.com for all your neon needs, and use the promo code LIGHTNING at checkout to save 10% off your first order. Now back to the podcast. Hello, Lightning Tamers. This is episode number 56, and in today's podcast, recorded August 13th, 2023, I'll be joined by Suzanne Hargrove, former head of conservation at the Toledo Museum of Art, in a conversation on conservation. We met in February 2022 during my GAPP, that's the Glass Artist Pavilion Project Residency, and she had graciously set up the Paul Seide Radio Light from the museum's collection. You know this, I have a wide interest in glass and gas-illuminated artwork, so I wanted to discuss Paul Seide's radio lights in this podcast as well. But I believe it's equally as important to address a variety of questions to give us an overview of art conservation and its relationship to artwork and the artist. So before we get into that, Suzanne, I want to hear about you and your work at the museum, which, note to our audience, this conversation is just before you retire.
Okay, so I'm Suzanne Hargrove. I'm the head of conservation here at the Toledo Museum of Art, and I have been at this institution for 20 years. So I started in 2003, and then I'll be finishing up at the end of this week, which will be July 7th, 2023.
Yeah, my mom just retired literally 5 days ago. She's sort of been at, she works in telecommunications, so she's been in the same building since there was operators and throughout the development of the internet. So it's been sort of interesting to see that much technological growth throughout her career.
Indeed. And before being here at the Toledo Museum, I was in the St. Louis at the St. Louis Art Museum for 19 years. So I'm calling it 40 years because I've certainly been in the profession that long. So
okay,
that's long enough.
So was that like a similar position?
Yes, in that institution, I was the head of objects conservation, whereas at this institution, at the Toledo Museum of Art, I'm in charge of all conservation.
Okay.
All the various departments in conservation.
Gotcha. So this is kind of going off our kind of a question list here, but just based on that, so object conservation versus, conservation at an art museum, there's a distinction between the objects in the museum and sort of the conservation approaches, I guess?
A little bit. So in the conservation field, one generally specializes in a specific discipline. So there are paintings conservators, objects conservators, works of art on paper conservators, musical instrument conservators, stained glass conservators, electronic media conservators, and it's even getting more specific in terms of those who might specialize in contemporary art. So within the field of conservation, there are these sub-disciplines. So one tends to specialize in a specific type of artwork, whether it's objects, paintings. Paper are the main ones, but there are various categories, subcategories as well. So my training was as an objects conservator, which is everything three-dimensional, which is pretty broad. But when it's very broad. And when I came here to Toledo, then I became the head of all of those areas of conservation. So I'm responsible for the entire collection rather than just the three-dimensional objects in the collection. Although in terms of treatment, were I to do a treatment on objects, which I do, it would be specifically on the three-dimensional pieces in the collection. And then within our national and international code of ethics for practice, if there's an area that is sort of beyond my specialty or capabilities, then you require the assistance of a specialist. So, for example, with treating stained glass, there are those who conservators of stained glass who that is their entire specialty. So when we had to treat some of our Tiffany stained glass windows, we brought in a specialist. And when we treated our cloister medieval stained glass windows, we brought in that same specialist to work on them.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we get part of your role is that you're, managing all these different aspects. Can you kind of tie in a few details of what those that responsibilities are as the head of conservation at Toledo Museum of Art?
Yes. So the title of this job is going to change, with the new person that they hired. It's going to be Director of Conservation. And I think that makes a little bit more sense in this day and age. Because you are really directing all aspects of conservation. And while people specifically think, if they think about conservation, they think in terms of doing actual treatment, but much of our work is focused on what we call preventive maintenance. And so as the easiest way to put it is all things age and break down with time, including people. So people, you can equate this to medicine and, human existence, that you change as you age. Certain parts of your body no longer function as well. Your material of your skin and so on breaks down and changes. You get wrinkles and so on. And artwork is the same situation. As artworks age, they undergo change. They begin to deteriorate in various ways. And what we as conservators focus our attention on is preventive maintenance. So just as people do things to maintain their health and longevity, diet, exercise, rest, what we do is focus on the things that will prevent aging of artworks. And that includes monitoring the environment. And by the environment, I include temperature and humidity and light levels, as well as display parameters in terms of protecting artworks perhaps under a vitrine, which is a glass or plastic case, or whether we put up physical barriers to keep people from touching artworks and so on. So it's much broader. We worry about insect activity, for example. We worry about special events in the museum that might invite insect activity, or whether events take place in galleries where there's food being served. We also worry about construction, as well as transporting and housing the collection, loans of artworks, where artworks travel from one place to another. They can go overseas to far destinations far afield. And so I'm involved in all of those activities, as well as setting policies and procedures managing a conservation budget, developing the department and departmental activities and initiatives, and promoting conservation both professionally within our own discipline and publicly through outreach, and mentoring future conservators. So it's a very broad area of activities that I'm responsible for here at the museum.
In like a typical week, how much of those responsibilities will kind of take up like the first 2 to 3 spots of your week in terms of like, activity wise?
So I have in my office a sign behind me that says every day is a conservation adventure, which is a phrase I coined. And that's because we always have projects and things that we have ongoing, but always something new will happen and come up. But a lot of the work that we do here at this museum, and I would say in museums in general, is exhibition driven. So much of our work revolves around the planning of artworks for exhibition. So we work, and we'll get into this also later on in this discussion, but we work a lot with curators and exhibitions people and so on here in the museum, and work with a list of artworks that are scheduled to be going on display. So we'll be focusing on those types of projects in terms of looking at the artwork, in terms of figuring out what the parameters are for exhibition or loan or treatment. And so I would say a lot of our time is spent focusing on those kinds of activities. And then it's a matter of doing the actual work that's involved with getting things ready for display. So I would say looking at the lists of objects and things, figuring out where we're going for putting an artwork out on view or loan or transport, whichever the case may be, and then focusing on what those specific artworks need.
I see.
And then within the department, I'm fortunate here in that we have people who are performing different functions. So we have a technician who's responsible for sort of monitoring the environment and our what's called IPM, which is insect pest management. So she focuses on those things. We have a coordinator who sort of manages all our projects and priorities and works on our documentation. So he's focusing on that. I have a person who's responsible for the works on paper collection, who does the matting and framing, and also sort of acts as liaison with the curators for the works of art on paper. So he's focusing on that. I have an assistant conservator of textile-based collections, so she's focusing on her activities related to the textiles. And I have an assistant objects conservator who focuses on the objects in the collection. And then we bring in specialists for the painting, works on paintings, works, and works on paper. So we have this overall umbrella of activities that we're doing. And then within that, we have specific people performing different activities related to that. So it's kind of like a 5-ring circus.
So, I mean, it takes a lot of people to keep these things, keep the function of these artworks in place.
Yep.
And then also to move around and things like that. So that's, I wouldn't expect less. Sometimes there are less, and that could be very challenging.
Yeah.
So, like, what led to your pursuit of a career in art conservation, and like what inspired you to work here at Toledo Museum of Art?
Great. So my journey began, over 40 years ago. I was in college. I was studying to be an archaeologist. That was my goal. I was always interested in archaeology, but I always really enjoyed science and art. So as I was focusing on this career in archaeology, I stumbled upon learning about the field of conservation and by a visit to a museum, and by saying that, at this point in time in my life, I was in Baltimore, and I contacted the Walters Art Gallery and said, I would like to talk to someone in restoration. And they said, oh, you mean conservation? And they were gracious enough to give me a tour of their conservation lab, and I was hooked at that point and decided at that point I would focus on becoming a conservator. So as a junior in undergrad school, I had to sort of turn everything around and start not all over again, but to become a conservator, you need to have a degree in what's called a related area of specialty, which is studio art, art history, and science. So I was able to finish my degree in archaeology because it was a related field, but then I had to also start taking all kinds of studio art classes and chemistry classes and art history classes to, qualify for getting into a graduate program in conservation. So there is one school now that actually offers a degree, an undergrad degree in conservation, but most of people, way people go about it is they get these all these prerequisites that are required, which includes 2 years of work experience in a conservation facility. Mm-hmm. So it took me a while to do all that, but then it's a matter of applying to graduate schools that offer master's degrees in conservation. And each of those schools only takes 6 to 10 students a year. So it's very difficult to get in, and there's high competition to get into one of those programs. And I was fortunate at the time to get into a program at the University College at Buffalo. Mm-hmm. So that's where I got my degree. Then I was always interested in working on objects. I mean, I didn't have any sort of dilemma in my mind. I knew exactly that I was going to focus on objects conservation. So that led me to working at my first job, which was in St. Louis. And then that was for 19 years as an objects conservator and head of a department. I sort of worked my way from the ground up from, assistant to associate to head of the department. And then the opportunity arrived here at the Toledo Museum of Art to be the head of the conservation department. And I found that a very interesting concept and a challenge. And I was intrigued with the collection here at the Toledo Museum of Art because it's fantastic, as well as the glass pavilion and the collection, which was not in the glass pavilion at the time because it hadn't been constructed. But I just found that as a wonderful opportunity and a unique challenge. So that was very exciting for me to be able to come here. And I was the first full-time conservator here at the Toledo Museum of Art, even though they had a history of working with conservators since the 1960s, but they always worked with private conservators, so people who, they contracted to do the work, and it was my opportunity to be their first staff person, and I saw that as really exciting to come here and be the trailblazer as the conservator on staff. So that I just thought was fantastic and is fantastic.
Was there like a specific? Do you recall any specific thing during that tour that you had that was the spark for switching into conservation?
Way back when?
Yeah.
Or at Toledo?
Way back when.
Way back when. The spark was, So I went to the Walters Art Museum and I was touring the conservation laboratory, and they had some Greek ceramics on the table, and then they had this little silver Egyptian figurine. It was a statue of, I think, Osiris. And, there it was sitting right there on the table, right in front of me, within touching distance. And that was just magical to be able to see an ancient artwork that very few people have the opportunity to look at up close and be within touching distance of. And that to me was just a magical, inspirational moment. And it was like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. I want to because I thought I would be an archaeological conservator, because there are archaeological conservators. So when I saw this archaeological artifact sitting there on the table, I thought, oh, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to be an archaeological conservator and go on excavation and be the conservator for the finds that are retrieved from excavation. So I actually did an internship at the Museum of London on their archaeological materials. And then when I came, that was for 9 months. And then when I came back to the US, I was casting about. There were not a lot of jobs wanting somebody to do archaeological conservation. So that led me to taking the job at St. Louis, thinking it was a 2-year contract project. And I thought, that's fine. I'll work there for 2 years. And they kept me on for 2 years. And I was like, oh, this is good. And 2 years turned into 4 years, and 4 years turned into a spouse, and spouse turned into a house, and house turned into a child, and there you are. And he, by the way, was a furniture conservator. So sometimes it's like doctors, we marry within the field. You know, he was on contract at the museum in St. Louis to work on the furniture collection, and, you know, we hit it off, and that was great too. So, yeah. He now designs his own furniture and builds his own furniture.
Of course.
Yeah.
If you love it enough, you'll definitely continue messing around with it. Was there any creative pursuits that came from being in this field or pursuing this field?
On my own? Or,
of your own,
beyond conservation?
Yeah.
Or
whether it's hobby or...
Yes. So the delightful thing here at the Toledo Museum of Art is we offer courses in different art activities. So I was able to do some of the glass art activities, did some glass blowing, and did work with jewelry, taking classes in jewelry fabrication. And also what was delightful to me was to be able to work with metals in terms of making Damascus steel and creating art out of Damascus steel. And that was a thrilling experience. And I have always been fascinated with metals and the properties of metals. So I have been taking classes here at the museum and elsewhere. And also one of my things in retirement that I will pursue is work in metals. So, yeah, I'm very excited about that. And that way, if I work on an artwork and I damage it and it's my own thing, it's not a problem. So, yeah, love doing metals and love all aspects of metals and metalwork. So,
yeah, it's definitely sort of like a really fun pursuit, because I took a few classes in metals, and as far as I went, it was mainly casting, but then jewelry was something that was really nice because you have to be I like to be as precise as possible earlier on. So that was kind of like a thing that I enjoyed, but it could be frustrating.
Yes, it can. And I actually have some ideas of combining work in glass with metal. So I have a piece that I want to do that I'm very excited about, working with the staff here at the museum in the glass blowing department and making a piece that's got glass and metal in it.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, I can't wait.
You guys got a good crew there, so like no doubt someone's going to help you. Someone's going to be able to tap in and figure out how to navigate that process. Yeah, it's sort of been my experience with the GAPP residency. Never experienced residency like that before, so it was really a good experience.
I'm actually working with them. I'll be turning over the project to my assistant conservator here, but on our Guimard metro station, which is in the front of the building, it had originally glass globes that illuminated part of the metro station. And there are only 2 of those globes left in existence of all the metro stations. And the others are all plastic. And so the ones that came with our metro station are plastic, like I said, because there's only 2 original ones remaining, and both are in museum collections. And so I'm working with the glass department to actually see if we can make recreate the glass ones. So working on recreating the glass globes. So they've undertaken that project by taking molds off the plastic ones and seeing if they can reproduce them in glass. That's very exciting.
I recall seeing Chuchin work a little bit on that.
Yes, indeed. So I'm not going to get to see it to completion because of schedules. They're very busy over there, but I'm really excited about that sort of opportunity. And I think that's one of the best things about this museum is that we have all these talented people on staff that create, art and we have that opportunity to work with them and learn more about processes and techniques and so on. And I've consulted with both Alan and Jeff Mack prior to him about how pieces might have been constructed, and it's a fantastic opportunity.
I forgot that Jeff was in that position before. I met him back in 2012. I took a class under him.
Yep.
And very, very awesome guy. The way that he thinks is amazing.
I would, both Alan Iwamura and Jeff Mack, there have been some pieces that it's like, well, how was that made? And it's so fantastic to have the opportunity to look at pieces with them and bring them into the conservation lab and say, okay, I'm looking at this. Is what I'm seeing the way? How was this made? Is this, original? What's going on with this piece? And that's such a great opportunity, such a great learning experience.
I think you touched briefly on conservation techniques, but would you be able to provide other examples of conservation treatments or how you would go about treating something?
So when we undertake a treatment, so some of the work that we do is examination. And so we might examine something as a consideration for purchase. So some of the work that we're involved in is examining an artwork to determine what has occurred to it in its history. So whether it's had previous repair, whether it's undergone, chemical change that have altered its appearance or its composition. So it's again, I equate it to the medical profession, like going to your general practitioner and just getting a physical. So we'll do that with artworks and determining what its current state of being is, and then determining what it may need, and also determining what has happened to it, because they can't talk to us and say, well, I broke my knee in 10 years ago. We have to find those sort of situations. Oh, yes, it's been broken here or there and repaired. So we'll use different diagnostic techniques, just as doctors do. So we'll sometimes use analytical equipment for testing. We'll take x-rays of things. We might look at things under ultraviolet light. We can do other more what's called non-destructive testing, such as X-ray fluorescence and other analytical techniques to sort of get its state of existence. And that will inform us in terms of what has happened to an artwork and in terms of what needs to happen to that artwork. But sometimes it really helps to get a better understanding of how things are actually fabricated in the first place. And it's so great to be able to talk with an artist, one with artists or other with people such as the glass blowers over in the glass pavilion and say, hey, how did they, how was this put together? Because we can actually include that in our documentation, because just as, again, I'll equate it to the medical profession, we keep records on all the things that we do, both in terms of writing up the condition of the artwork, as well as writing treatment reports, writing proposals and treatment reports in terms of what it is that we see is going on and what we actually do. Mm-hmm. And I know we'll get into this as part of this discussion also of the number of people that we work with in doing that activity.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, and we'll get into this too, I don't know if this sort of segues into some of your other questions, but it's really helpful to get information from artists also, because both artist intent is very important, as well as the actual processes and materials that artists use to create their artworks.
My next question, I think I might skip here, is about memorable or unique conservation projects. I think you pretty much answered that regarding the replacing of those globes. Is there other ones that you had in mind, or was that something that you were going to mention for this question?
Well, there's another one that I did, but it's kind of a long story. We have a sculpture by Dwayne Hansen, and I don't know how much of the audience will be familiar, but Dwayne Hansen was active in the 60s and 70s, and it was known for making these life-size, very accurate reproductions of people. So he would do a museum guard, or he would do a woman shopping in a grocery store, or he would do these tourists. And it was really everyday people that he would actually go out and find and actually take molds off the people and recreate the people. Yeah. And so we have one of his sculptures that we acquired in the 2000s, and it was one of an executive. And when we acquired it, this was a tired-looking executive from the 70s, I would say. And he came with 2 suits and was seated in a chair. And as we were doing the research on it, it was like, well, this figure has 2 suits. So the suits, were they original to the artwork? Was which suit is original, and so on. So we went down this path of researching the suits, and that led me to finding examples of this particular artwork on display in other places, and we learned that the chair was different. It had been changed. In looking at old catalogs, there were 3 different chairs used at different points in the sculpture's lifetime, which led me down a path to discovering that this sculpture had this person that the sculpture represents was a person named Mr. Kaufman, and he was Melvin Kaufman, and he was actually a real estate developer in New York who was very much interested in the arts, and really developed when he was developing and rehabbing buildings and so on. He really contacted artists and had the artworks incorporated into the design and construction of the buildings. And so he was very excited about having himself reproduced, and he had worked with an architect and utilized these specific chairs by a designer named Rudolph de Herrick. And so I discovered that he should have been seated in one of these other chairs, and it was tracking down these other chairs, and which led me to meet his great-grandnephew and locate his ex-wife. And she was fantastic and had all this information about him and his artwork and so on and so forth, and learning that the attribution of the title of the artwork actually was wrong based on her information. So the title was brought back to what it should be, which was called Another Day. And she happened to have some of these chairs in her possession, and she donated one to us. It was the wrong color. So then I had to research the color, the appropriate paint color, as much as I could. So it was reuniting this sculpture, finding out which suit was original, working with a textile conservator to, treat the suit and so on. And, it was an amazing experience to sort of be the detective and find out how this sculpture was originally intended to be displayed. It was in the lobby of one of his buildings for
Wow.
many years, which he loved, until later on people thought they didn't like it, so it was taken out. But there are pictures of this sculpture in the lobby and the public walking by and doing a double take, and it's like, is that guy real or what's going on with this guy? Kind of thing. So anyway, that was a very memorable experience for me, to be able to learn more about an artwork and bring it more in line with what it was supposed to be as originally intended. So I hope at some point at the museum, we talked about doing a show just about the whole conservation treatment and the whole, detective work and everything that went into learning about this artwork. So, and I hope that will still happen. So,
I mean, I love that. That's an amazing little story there, because it really does highlight the sort of investigative properties and the way that you kind of have to track down a lot of information to really find the core of what the piece really is. Because you can receive a piece and it's like, is it really done yet? And some people don't know that. I've sort of ran into that with Paul Seide's piece, which is something we'll be talking about soon. But someone received the piece without the illumination base, and they didn't know it lit up. They never knew.
Right. Exactly.
It's fascinating.
It's very exciting. I mean, it's one of the treats of the job. Yeah. So that was one of my memorable experiences and Mrs. Atwood, her last name is Atwood. She's a fantastic person and a wonderful person. And I just enjoyed, she told me about her husband, who's this figure that's accurately represented and what he was like and those kinds of things. And that was just wonderful too. He was very dedicated to the arts.
Yeah. And that's a story of a victory where many times you either run into a dead end or things are just unknown.
Yeah.
This is not on a question here. It's like, well, how do you tackle, how do you kind of stay professional about these dead ends? Because I know for personally, if someone really into it, like myself, it can really dig into my ego when I can't quite solve something. How does the institution handle dead ends? Is it just accepted part of the process where there's going to be a dead end and it's going to be sit there for a bit, or?
So the way the conservation profession deals with sort of dead end scenarios, and this goes back to treatment. So treatment, the conservation aesthetics in terms of treatment have evolved over the years, even during my career, where in the past we did things that were much more invasive than we would ever do now. So an example with paintings. So when I started graduate school to become a conservator, you started by treating all the treating objects, paintings, and paper. So you treated works in each of those areas before you declared your major, so to speak. So there was at one point in time, and this was really got started in the 1970s and continued into the 80s when I was in school, which was what was called lining paintings. And they would do these wax linings of paintings where you would actually put the painting on a heated table, and you would brush the back of the painting with wax, and you would infuse the wax into the painting surface, and the wax would, melt into the canvas, and it was a system to really secure flaking paint. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, we know much more about the environment and how the environment reacts on, causes reactions with an artwork. And that, by today's standards, would be considered a very invasive treatment. And that we would know is no longer it's done upon rare occasion, but not nearly with the degree that when I learned. So within our profession, we have become much more reticent about doing things that may be considered invasive to the artwork. And as part of our ethics, what we do is supposed to be utilizing materials that are known for their good aging properties. So with regard to adhesives, where we put something broken back together, we use materials that are known not to degrade over time, and we use adhesives that are not stronger than the artwork itself so that it can be taken apart and that there's enough of a difference between the artwork and the materials that we're using so that you can undo the work that you've done. Mm-hmm. So within our profession, we do a lot less invasive work, and there are times when you can't solve a problem. And what we do is we say, well, we can't solve this problem now, but we may be able to in the future because we don't know technology-wise what kinds of analytical equipment is going to be developed or what kinds of treatments can be developed. So sometimes you just have to put the object in essentially stasis and you do the best that you can. And that can be either something that there's a problem that you can't solve, which is this word for it is inherent vice. So inherent vice means an object is self-destructing. It's just going to fall apart and degrade. And it's funny because one of the materials that is most sensitive to this would be synthetic materials and plastics. So people constantly think, you hear it every day. Plastics, they don't break down. They're here forever, but it's not quite true. It depends on the type of plastic, and plastics may break down into certain components, and some components may not degrade over time, but other components will readily degrade. Yeah. And so when you have an artwork made out of plastic, it can be very problematic in terms of how to keep it from yellowing and from getting brittle or sticky or gooey or turn it into a puddle of goo or turn it into something so brittle that you touch it and it falls apart kind of thing. So sometimes we just have to say, we can't do anything right now, but we'll do the best we can, and we will continue to investigate in our, scientists in our field will continue to investigate and look for solutions to the problem.
And that sort of goes to the next question, which is like how technology plays a role in conservation.
You're talking about what role technology plays in the development of our profession. What could be out there, what is on the horizon for the field, or how has our field changed? So in one way, we do less invasive work, but technology is really always informing us in terms of the things that we can do. Examples are 3D scanning, for example, and 3D printing. Yeah. On the one side, you have artists who are creating 3D printed pieces, and that poses a whole set of challenges.
Oh, I'm one of those.
Yeah. And, when I studied this a little bit, it was, at the outset when people started using it, doing 3D printing, sometimes they use virgin materials and sometimes they, you don't like the way that printout is, you throw it back in the hopper and you remelt it. And we were finding in the field that there's a great difference between a 3D printed object that's got virgin material in it versus recycled materials in it in terms of the aging properties and so on. But so there's that in terms of artists creating things, but then within our field, people have now been scanning things to create 3D replica components or 3D replicas of things. So that's just been an amazing part of our field, and it will only get more and more amazing as we're developing our technologies to scan things and look at things and recreate components that are missing, and just all of that is just, we're on the cusp of all of that, and that's going to really change the field. It's going to be a game changer. So that's really exciting. And just scientific analytical techniques, you know, taking micro samples of things, or just analytical techniques where you can learn more about an artwork. I envision the people be able to scan artworks that have fingerprints from the artist on there, and you'll be comparing those fingerprints on other artworks for forgery techniques, as well as just learning it. Yeah. Well, there's Van Gogh's thumbprint. He stuck his thumb on the edge of the canvas and it's stuck in the paint, and we're scanning it. And this is the thumb, what Van Gogh's thumbprint looks like. And here's this other guy, and it's not Van Gogh, it's somebody else. So there's a lot happening.
I hadn't thought about the 3D printing as because I use that a lot for my armature construction. That this is something that's come to mind is like, I think it's important we're having this conversation about conservation, because when you got the exposure because your interests aligned with that, and then it took you into art, where many who pursue art in undergrad, even further on, don't even touch on the other part of the world beyond like the conceptual, the practical methods. And it's sort of something that I want to push institutions into, but that it's not going to happen. But I want to make people aware that there's this other part of this world that they're never actually tapping into. It's fascinating. I like thinking about these things.
I like it too, and to me, the door swings both ways. So the other part of this discussion that we're having is about artist intent, because certainly with living artists, or artists who were, living not in the not too distant past, when they die, we lose an incredible amount of information. We'd lose the information about what it, from a curatorial perspective, those are people who really study the art history of things. We learn about what their motivations were for creating a piece, what their idea processes were when they were creating these pieces, and what was going on in the time. Was it a certain event that caused them to go in this particular vein or direction? And I think that really informs the audience. You're missing such a huge component of the artwork, not knowing what was happening at the time that caused this artist to move in a certain direction or to create a piece in a certain way. So there's that component. And then there's the actual materials that they were using, including adhesives, or as you're saying, when you're 3D printing, the synthetic materials are changing and evolving. And that can really inform us in terms of the longevity of the piece. Were you using a polyester resin? Were you using a PVC? What kind of resin were you actually using? Was it a particular brand? Because we can find that particular brands, didn't age as well as another brand. Those kinds of things. How did you glue it together? If you did that, what kind of paints were you using? Were you using acrylics? Were you using epoxies? Those kinds of things. Because again, that really informs us in terms of how this material is likely to age over time, or whether certain products will react differently or deteriorate excessively given exposure to light, or exhibit case materials, or being next to another object, and those kinds of things. So that's really important for us. But I think it's really what I like to think of, and what the message I would give to all the artists out there is, this is you, and this is your life, and this is your legacy. This object that you create, this is you. And do you want this aspect of you and your persona and your energy and your life? How do you want that to live on, not, in the future? Do you want it to fall apart? Do you want it to be preserved under all circumstances? What do you want to have happen to this? Because this is your legacy. And, I think I'm retiring, so I think about these things a lot because I'm in the last quarter of my life, and so you think about your legacy a lot. What have I done? What am I doing? Where am I going? And when you're in the mix of things and excited and all that, you're not necessarily thinking in that direction. But when you create this piece, that's part of you. It's your child in a sense. And how do you want your child to live on beyond you? So that's the way I like to think about it from the artist end of things, because from the conservation end of things, that's what we are focusing on. We are focusing on providing the best environmental conditions and performing the best, conservation treatment process to promote the longevity of this creation for the rest of time, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what we are trying to do. So and the more you can, as an artist, can inform us, the more we can do that job in terms of providing the best care for that object in perpetuity, in a nutshell.
Very true. It's an evolving concept or evolving nature for me, because I'm in that first part of it, which is getting to a state in which I can actually fund better materials. But before you could fund better materials, you have to show proof of work, and the proof of work often isn't quite there yet. I just set up a piece to go out to a show this month, and I had to do a couple touch-ups and updates because I learned over the summer from other people better ways to handle how I configured that piece at first. And that a piece will always get worked on, reworked over time. So I find that eventually that piece will have its ideal body that it will be able to survive versus the way it was 2 years ago when it was made. But that's just a part of how I think, and I try to, in the space of plasma art, I try to encourage that part because we're dealing still with a lot more unknowns. So if you get more knowns, the better the piece can survive.
Yep.
And so then, what considerations or ethical dilemmas arise when it comes to making decisions about conservation treatments or interventions? You have a work and you're trying to approach it. Are there things that become very difficult decisions? Yeah.
Because you might have an artwork made out of chewing gum and sticks, and it may be because the artist intended. It's like, I want to make this thing out of chewing gum and sticks, and okay, you made it out of chewing gum and sticks. Now you had to figure out how to. And you wanted it to be chewing gum and sticks, and okay, now we're going to work with that.
Chewing gum seems to be kind of like plastic. It stays around for a while. Except maybe they changed some of the formulas nowadays, but
yes, indeed,
they definitely had to.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Earlier, we were going to try to get to this, but it was about how collaboration with other museum departments contribute to the efforts of conservation at the museum. You kind of highlight a little bit on it. Is there a little more that you can kind of give us on that?
We work most integrally with the curatorial staff at the museum. So the curatorial staff, curators are those who are specialists in an area of the collection, and they know all the art historical aspects of an artwork. So there are curators of different disciplines. So there might be a curator specializing in European art or American art or Islamic art or Native American art. So whenever we are looking at a specific object, we work hand in hand with the curator to learn as much information as we can from them about an artwork in terms of the art historical aspects of it, in terms of they can help us with determining authenticity or determining what the appropriate appearance is and those sorts of things. So they would be our main group of people that we work with in terms of the actual hands-on experience with the object or artwork. But there are so many other departments that we work with to make the magic happen, and that includes our registrar's department, who are responsible for keeping all the records about the artwork and who are responsible for getting the artworks to and from the museum, and sort of managing where and what how the information about the collection is stored and where the collection is located and those sorts of things. And then we'll work with the exhibitions department in terms of the exhibition timelines and things, how an exhibition is going to go together. We work with them on what sort of materials are going to be used. We work with our facilities department on if the exhibit is going to be constructed and how the construction is going to occur and what sort of materials are going to be used in the construction. Is the construction going to create dust that's going to affect the rest of the collection? Are they going to use paints or adhesives or solvents to clean the building or to clean the space? And because those can affect the collection adversely. So we'll deal with those people. We'll work with education in terms of how they're going to present the collection and label copy and what kind of tours are going to happen. And we can be working with them in terms of they might want conservation information as part of their educational program. We'll work with marketing in terms of how the show is going to be marketed. They might want to do a piece on conservation. We've actually done shows that focus on conservation related to exhibitions and the collection and so on. And now with social media, there's so much more of that interest in terms of, we might do a little clip of the work that we're doing as either a promotional, in a promotional way, or just as part of how an exhibit happens, those kinds of things. So the work that we do really it affects all the areas of the museum. But it's a collaboration. I'm not saying that, we're the conservators sitting in our high tower doing these different things. It's definitely a wonderful collaboration with people from different departments, because we all are pursuing the same goal, which is to highlight the artworks in the collection and provide, a great experience for the visiting public. And so that is, all of us are playing our own role in making that happen. So we all have to work together to achieve that goal. We all have our own initiatives. We all have our own, aspects of the project, but our mission is the same. So it requires a lot of collaborative effort.
As one would expect.
Yeah.
Or hopefully so. I mean,
the phrase "it takes a village." Well, it takes a village to display artwork, and everybody. I would say no one role is more significant, perhaps, than another. We are a moving part of that. I like to think of it as the best part because it's my favorite part, but we all have that same goal in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what advice would you give for aspiring art conservators who wish to pursue a career in this field?
Back in my day, there wasn't the internet, and it was much harder to learn about the field of conservation. But today, with social media and the internet, and with the work that I have done here at the museum and elsewhere, we're working hard to promote that by giving tours to school groups and getting YouTube information out there and so on. But If it's something that people are thinking about, I would say one of the best places to start is with our parent national organization, which is AIC for short, but I would type in AIC Conservation because otherwise you're going to get the American Institute of Architects or something like that. But AIC Conservation, and that stands for the American Institute for Conservation of Cultural and Historic Artworks. And that website really says, has information about what is it like to be a conservator? What is a career in conservation like? What does it mean? What do you do on a daily basis? And it really gives you a good foundation of information about what the work that we do and how to go about becoming a conservator. And that will lead you down the rabbit hole to other informational sites and so on. So that's, to my mind, a good starting point. And, then if a person were to decide, hey, I really, really do think I want to do this, contact an institution such as ours. And we have fielded calls from people saying, hey, I really want to thinking about getting into conservation. We have spoken with people about that and, how to go about getting into the field. We have given tours and things to school groups and so on. So we're very much interested in public outreach. We may not be able to do it all the time, depending on our schedule, which is pretty ambitious and is only going to become more ambitious as we now have a team of 5 curators. So that's a lot of people asking us to do things. And we're also really, as most institutions are doing now, is sort of reevaluating the whole way we display the collection. So we will be reinterpreting the collection. We have a big seminar coming up later this month to talk about reinterpretation of the collection with a public being invited to participate in that. And we will be doing a whole reconstruction of the renovation of the museum. There's a lot that's going to be happening. We're changing it up completely.
Oh, man.
Which is good time for me to retire because I've done that in the past in my career. And it's like, well, I've been there and done that. And it's time to give somebody else that opportunity. But, start by looking online and then proceed if that still really interests you. Is like, yeah, I really think I want to do this, and try contacting a major museum and say, can I talk to conservation people, or do you have information sites on your museum website that I can go to, or even look at the institution's website and see, because oftentimes there'll be videos there about conservation and so on. So that's my advice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In our conversation prior to this interview, we had discussed sort of the burden of documentation artists will be acquired in a museum acquisition of artwork.
Yep.
And I see this doubled in terms of what's required for plasma art because of all the different things that go into it, all the different technologies that may not be accessible one way or another. What kind of documentation would you like artists to keep in mind or add to their artistic practice, whether it's plasma or not, just like artists all across the board?
So one of the things that museums in general have been talking about forever is the artist interview process, because once upon a time we thought about doing sending out forms and all that, and it was like, well, this is like doing your taxes. Nobody's going to want to get this 15-page form and what did you use, what did you do, how did you do it? Well, that's like, forget it. So we are working on an artist interview process where we will have sort of our ducks in a row with questions. And, now with social media, it's so fantastic because we could just sit down and have this conversation about your piece that we've acquired and, what did you do? What were you thinking? And so on and so forth. So for us, when you think about it, again, I like to think about it, again, going back to the medical profession, when you fill out their questionnaire in terms of, have you ever broken a leg? Have you ever, had surgery, blah, blah, blah. Thinking about the materials that you've used. I've used, and if you can even give product information or take pictures and say, here, you go around your studio. Yep, I use that. And, it can be simple. You don't have to write it all out. You just take a picture of the can of blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I used, Dr. Bronner's soap, kind of thing. Those kind of things will inform us, certainly, any kind of materials or adhesives that are used to create the piece, plastics in particular, what kind of plastics were being used, and then what you want to have, how you want this artwork to age. Some artists really want the things to fall apart. They want, it's like, well, if this is a metal piece and it tarnishes, I want it to stay tarnished. Mm-hmm. And I want it to, if it gets green corrosion on it, I want it to stay with green corrosion. Or no, I want it to be bright and shiny, and I want it, to be displayed that way. Some artists, what if it's an electronic component and technology is going to change? Do you want it upgraded as technology changes? Or it's like, no, I want it to, this has, in the case of Paul Seide, he's old TV vacuum tubes in it. No, I'm not saying that's what he said, but with particular artists, for example, there's an artist who did 8mm projection film, and they wanted the projector running to be part of the audience experience. They didn't want it to be converted to digital. It's like, no, I want to hear the clickety clackety sound of that projector. So how do you want it to function as technology changes or as parts no longer become available? What is your intent? That artist intent to me is very important in terms of what you want to, how you want to see that piece in perpetuity. Like if we have problems with the plastic and it degrades, yeah, you can use another plastic to, replace the plastic on it, or no, if it starts peeling off, just let it peel off. What is your intent both now and in the future for the artwork? Those are the kinds of questions I would want to know as from a conservation perspective, but a curator might want to know, and it would help too, like what prompted you to create this? Was it outrage against environmental climate change? Was it outrage against, some event that you've seen happen, world events or individual events or community events that, that caused this, you to promote, to do this, what inspired you to do this kind of thing. So.
All right.
And it could even be, hey, it could be in a video, to my mind. If you just made a video and you said, hey, here's my thing, and you got your thing and you're sitting there and you're just talking about it. It's like, yeah, I made this with blah, 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 and da, 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 and I did this, and I was thinking about Christmas and presents, and I wanted to make something happy and look like a present, and, those kinds of things. To my mind, a video clip would even be beneficial. It doesn't have to be something sort of onerous and like, oh God, this is like doing taxes.
Doesn't have to be too clinical.
Yeah. I would take a video any day, if it was, it could even be, we could even knock it down to time. You can't do more than 15 minutes,
Yeah.
Short and sweet, make a short and sweet video. And, we've got this great thing about the artist and what they feel about their artwork. And your opinion could change over time.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. And that's the dilemma for us, is like, well, do we be true to Percy in, 2023, or now it's 2035 and he changed his mind? Which Percy do we pay attention to?
Hopefully that Percy will have pretty much a stable intent behind the work, because that's sort of how I think about it. Like if you had acquired my Inspired Neon Citrus piece, I would have a lot of information for you, and it would pretty much die if it dies until who knows, that next step. But if there's like, hey, we're reaching out to you, this thing's at its end. You can't acquire the original parts that you had made 10 years ago, that you had from 10 years ago. Do you know if you still want that alive? And that could be a question, but like, sometimes I'm starting to learn to like let the work go. And if someone can save it, they can save it. That's kind of how it has to be, really. Like, I mean, it's almost.
What if we though?
Because it could survive as a video. By that time,
exactly,
maybe there's
exactly what
a 3-dimensional VR recreation of it. Who knows?
And are you okay with that?
Oh hell yeah! I put that on my social media. Like,
so maybe the person in 2035 is going to say no. It's that whole experience of seeing it right there in 3D, and a video isn't going to do it. So it's like watching fireworks on TV.
Yes, the video doesn't quite do it enough, but a picture does worse. Okay. Because of the particularity of plasma artwork, the picture's not enough.
Yeah.
But like, of course, the best experience is to visit it in person. But you can't ask that person in Japan to be like, yeah, you can't see that. Nah, you can't possibly see a video of it because you can't be there in the U.S.
Right. But that's, again, goes to artist intent. Yeah. So that's to my mind, the interesting thing about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the core. So all this is to set up sort of our last part of the conversation, which regards Paul Seide's work.
Yeah.
I've been attempting meaningful contact with Paul over the last 2 to 3 years, and I have not been able to make or acquire any discussion or thoughts from him.
Yeah.
And then for like our audience here, I have made a podcast episode reading and discussing a 1990 interview of Paul Seide from Glass Focus newsletter by Beverly Copeland, which again you could find in the show notes for episode 40. But Paul Seide was not only a pioneer in the American studio glass movement, but also in gas-illuminated or plasma light sculpture, bringing his knowledge of neon from the Agani Institute to furnace glass blowing, and inspiring Dale Chihuly to use neon in his Neon Forest installation. And in terms of education in glass, he learned a little bit from Dale, but was encouraged to pursue a glassblowing education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison under Harvey Littleton, one of the first universities to offer studio glassblowing. Now what I'd like to discuss here is where the conservation fits in the course of this conversation about Paul Seide's work, where I had been contacted by various collectors personally who own one of Paul Seide's radio lights. And before we get into what was requested, I have a few additional questions to throw in here.
You got it.
So the first question here is, what are some of the concerns that come to mind, which we may both agree here, when it comes to gas-illuminated sculpture like plasma?
So, from a conservation perspective, what comes to mind is the nature of the artwork itself, what the artwork is comprised of, and then what apparatus and technology is used to create the effect, the lighting effect, and what, again, goes to artist's intent is with regard to what to do when certain types of technology are no longer available, and what do we do about that? Mm-hmm. So those are the conservation concerns. So with Radiolight, when we decided I got involved with that artwork in 2012 when we were doing the show Color Ignited, which was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the studio glass movement. So got this piece out, and it's like, well, what is this, and how does it work, and what do we do about it, kind of thing. And so it was looking at this electronic box, and there was sort of a set of instructions on how to hook it up and so on. And I was able to open the case to look at it to see if all the parts looked like they were intact, because it had gone out on loan to a sax exhibition, which was in the 90s and went to like 5 different venues. So the thing was traveling around. So you imagine this box is riding on a truck for 5 different venues. So that's, multiple trips. So I was able at that point in time to actually get in touch with Paul Seide and learn about the piece and the actual electronic box, the radio transmitter that creates the light. So I learned from Paul about the glass piece and how the glass piece was made and what was going on with the glass piece. And then I was able to talk with the engineer who actually built the box for the piece and to talk about what was going on with it, how it works, how it functions, and actually got more detailed instructions and operating instructions on how to actually make the piece function. And it was a great thing in that at that time, they were kind enough to loan us a transmitter box. I explained to them about how I was concerned about the longevity of our, transmitter and what would happen if it fails and so on and so forth. And they were kind enough to loan me a spare to utilize during the run of the exhibition, which then had to give back at the end of the exhibition. So that's what we wound up doing. But it's a conundrum in terms of where do we go from here when those components and even the people who know how to deal with, repair those or resupply those or rebuild those components are no longer out there either, When I was a little, when I was a little kid, you'd go to the local hardware store and there'd be these boxes and you'd bring in your TV tubes and you'd plug them into the box to see if the tubes were working. And because you wouldn't necessarily know because your television had a bazillion of these tubes and you just bring them in and plug them into this box to see if they're working or not. And then you find which one was not working and you buy the replacement kind of thing. But, nobody knows that anymore. And, so it's a dying technology. So it's a problem.
Yeah.
So what I did at the time was, recorded all my notes from these conversations that I had with him to talk about, well, how does the box operate? How do you set it up? How do you build the box? Can you replace certain things? Because we had an old platform that the antenna plates sat on that was old velvet. And it's like, was the blue velvet part of what you did, or was that something that somebody else did? And like, yeah, something somebody else did. So that, the blue, I didn't know. You got this, these 2 metal plates on this thing, on this piece of wood that's covered with blue velvet. It's like, well, is the blue velvet? And it was like, no, the blue velvet wasn't part of it. So I could get rid of the blue velvet, which was all
a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, it was threadbare and faded and so on and so forth, but that's important too. Or was it like, no, it's supposed to sit on blue velvet, and then it becomes a question of, well, can I replace the blue velvet with a new blue velvet? Is it with the color of the velvet? So on and so forth. So there were things like that. So I was able to capture all of that information, including more detailed instructions on how to operate the radio and how to tune it and whether this could be displayed under a vitrine, because as you know, that it's these 2 beautiful curving pieces of glass that, fit into each other like a puzzle and they rock back and, would rock back and forth if they're touched. And that really, again, going back to the beginning, when we're talking about conservation and protecting the artwork, we have to worry about that in a public setting and whether or not we could put it under a vitrine if that were okay with him. And it's like, yes, you can do that, but you have to realize you have to tune the piece every day, which involves, well, he was saying that, and it was true. When we did the run of the show, we wound up putting the piece in a corner where people couldn't really get to it, but could enjoy it. But we had to turn it on and check the tuner every day and tune it. usually it was just adjusting the radio frequency rather than moving the glass pieces around. But yeah, there was a lot to it. So
did you ever give his like intention for the piece overall?
About the design of it?
Not the design, but like sort of handling when it's like, what if the transmitter doesn't work? Did he give you a sense of what his intention was?
Only in that it was like, you can send it to us and we can try to fix it kind of thing. But, again, this was in 2012,
right.
So it's
and changes.
It's 11 years later now.
Yeah.
It's
and
like
you could easily change your mind on that regards too.
You can change your mind, or you can be dead.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm thinking about or retired, or you're off on the beach in Florida and you don't give a crap anymore. I don't know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it would be good in my mind to just sort of reconnect. In fact, you inspired me to think, maybe I ought to call these guys up and see if they'll talk to me one more time and just touch base with them and see what the deal is. So, and they may or may not want to talk to me either.
Yeah.
They're like, who are you? What? No, I'm busy, or maybe they do. I don't know. So
yeah,
you've inspired me to just sort of think about reconnecting with them before I leave at the end of the week.
Yeah, because I came across his work early in my undergrad, but I came across it. It was in Toledo's collection through a blog that a student had written about the work.
Right.
Which is funny to kind of get pulled in that way, right?
Yes. That was what the one that Courtney did here at the museum?
I don't recall who it was. I found like a personal blog page for someone. It wasn't connected directly to the Toledo Museum.
Okay. Because we had an intern, she, one of my things is mentoring future conservators. So we had an intern here that summer from one of the conservation programs, and she said, I got it. The schools require me to do a video about something. And I said, why don't you do it about this piece? So she did, about how her job was to go and tune it every day and so on. So I would say every 5 to 7 years, somebody contacts her, tracks her down and says, hey, I got one of these. What do I do? And then she says, you got to call the museum here. And I get this call saying, I got one of these radio lights. What's the deal? And, I give them the best information that I can about it. But, yeah, it's a problem. So, but her people will find her video of saying, they'll Google radio, Paul Seide Radio Light, and one of her YouTube video will come up. And then, it'll come back to me. So here we are. Or you'll find it and get inspired, so.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't even hit that YouTube video. I might have taken it down.
Okay. I don't know. It was out there for years. And like I said, every once in a while, somebody would contact me and say, I just got one of these at auction, or I'm just, they come by the piece somehow and want to know more. What's the deal here? How's it work? How do I turn it on? Kind of thing. Because I guess they didn't come with instructions.
Yeah.
We kind of had a set, but I did more after talking with Paul, back in 2012. We wrote up the instructions about it, which, he said things like the piece needed to be turned on. And, we said, do you leave it on? We're going to have this show. Should we turn it off at the end of the day, or is it better to just leave it on? And he said, no, it should be turned on and off daily because the tubes will burn out faster.
Yep.
And that you'd have to tune it each time you turn it back on, because the radio signals will drift, and it won't have might not glow as brightly,
right?
If you don't tune it. So,
Yeah,
and then if it breaks down, he said, contact me. So he's only going to be out there for so long. And
Yep.
at some point, he's not going to be available, So that's a problem.
Yeah,
And you were investigating whether there were alternative technologies. And actually, I look back at my notes when, and one of the questions we had asked him was about solid state versions without tubes. And he had said that they tested solid state systems at the time. And both Paul, and the engineer agreed they didn't have the same effect, that it was, and I, wrote here, the solid state was not as bright, seemed flimsy, and they were never satisfied by it.
Which is true, which, by that statement, it's true.
Okay.
On his end at that time.
Yeah.
It's like saying, leather helmets in football early on is good. Well, yeah, it was good early on.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it's we're kind of waiting for sort of the technology to be reinvestigated by various electrical engineers who are fascinated by this. And the goal is not to be too pushy because the industry isn't directly connected to a stable sense of capitalistic gain. That's sort of it seems like the whole mechanism is about, can we make money from it, which is
correct.
Why the advancement in neon has gotten as far as it has and had such staying power and such standardization, because it had a means of capital maintenance.
Yes.
But I foresee the things that people are trying to solve now, or these different electrical engineers, is how do we add safety and self-regulating features to this? And that's like, can this thing regulate itself so it doesn't burn itself out? And can it detect whether or not the line's connected or not? So it doesn't, so let's say someone didn't quite install it properly and it's wired up to an electrode or whatever, and it fell off. If that wire falls off, is it still shooting out the high voltage, high frequency, and possibly zapping someone who is going to retrieve or fix it or maintain it? Is it able to shut itself off if it overheats? Those sort of things. And is it able to stay within the legal frequencies? So it's not affecting things beyond a certain radius.
Airplanes flying overhead.
And that sort of what our last conversation was kind of concluding, that it's kind of a sit and wait sort of thing at this point. And I'm satisfied with that because I'm going to hopefully live long enough to see some advancement there. So you kind of do as much as you can with what you got, and what we got isn't adequate replacement for Paul's piece to be put in a museum space.
But again, so coming more full circle on our conversation, it's like, okay, well, we'll wait until, the opportunity presents itself, till technology catches up, kind of thing. Yeah. Where technology is there for us to be able to do this. So. And,
kind of, I'm going to close up here a little bit. We, you did mention some of the difficulties is, trying to get the parts to repair it if it needs to be repaired, getting in contact with someone to get a loaner device or a transmitter. Has there been more challenges beyond those things when it comes to working with pieces like Paul Seide's?
Right. I mean, the other example is cathode ray tubes. And so one of the other projects I worked on was our Marisol Escobar piece, has a small Sony micro TV, and it burned out. We had the original, and it was getting to the point where it was starting to fail. So I was going online and buying, I'd go on eBay and buy, replacement ones. And some of them worked, some of them didn't. And we wound up, the piece was going on tour, and it's going to go on tour again coming up 2024. And we actually, since Marisol Escobar did not leave any kind of intent, we wound up putting in, an LED screen, because it's supposed to show a snow pattern as far as we know. And so we did an LED screen repeating that, and gutted, one of the substitute TVs I bought, had a person who specializes in this sort of thing gut it and put in this LED screen, as a stopgap measure to preserve the original one that's still functioning. Mm-hmm. So we want to preserve that. So, and they don't make cathode ray tubes anymore. And there was actually a whole thing that somebody gave a lecture 2 years ago that they have a way in Germany to actually sort of cut the back off the cathode ray tube and under vacuum replace that with another component to get it functioning, but it's on larger size tubes and so on. But the technology pretty much is not there anymore. It doesn't exist. So it's a problem.
Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I think we talked nearly 2 hours almost.
That's awesome. Yeah, who's going to listen to a 2-hour podcast?
Hey, someone will. We'll split it in half if we have to.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's great. I love having this conversation.
Thank you, Percy.
It's really interesting to have like 14 questions, but I'm asked about like 20 plus questions, because every bit of insight you brought in had given me more things to ask about. And so it's definitely something I'm happy to share with my audience about conservation, because it's going to be an important part of our practice moving forward.
Well, again, and it's just thinking about artists. You're talking to the artists out there, and it's like, what do you want to have happen to your art? We're here to care for your art. We're the art doctors, kind of. So we're here for you guys, really. Yeah. So that's where it counts. So, I'm so glad that you asked me to have this conversation. I mean, I'm honored from that perspective as well. So I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, and you're welcome. Enjoy your retirement soon.
Oh, thank you. I will be doing some art. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
So I hope our paths will continue to cross.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Maybe I'll force you into making some plasma stuff then.
Well, I don't know if I'm quite there yet, but who knows?
Who knows, exactly.
It's possible. Yep. So thank you, Percy.
Thank you for listening to the Taming Lightning podcast. Music credits to the following artists in order of appearance: Retro by One, Taming Lightning Theme by Trav B. Ryan, Good to Go by One, and Walking by Roz Hobb. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thank you, Suzanne, for your knowledge and experience in art conservation. I hope you have a great retirement, and I'm excited to see how this conversation can help influence change in the artistic practice of not only plasma, but also other artistic mediums. I'd like to thank the Pittsburgh Glass Center for supporting me as a place of research and inspiration, Toledo Museum of Art and Glass Pavilion for your continued support and engagement, the Plasma Art Alliance, where I have an access to a well of knowledge and connects me to some amazing and supportive people, and my partnership with Global Rare Gases, under the mentorship of Jim Avolt and support by Joey Budseeker. If you'd like to support Taming Lightning, subscribe to the newsletter on www.taminglightning.net or follow on Instagram at Taming Lightning. Other options for support are one-time donations through Ko-fi, spelled ko-fi.com/Taming Lightning. Or you can join me on Patreon for additional perks and benefits. I'll have links provided in the show notes. Feel free to share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.